Good morning. It's early. The general got me up this morning, said she wanted to get out of town. The coronavirus is attacking, and so I got my red on so I can blend in with the British troops while we sneak through them. But I thought I'd show you something of interest over my shoulder here. You can see these what looks like marshlands now, and look at you have these defined canals, and the land area, the squares, were used for farming what they would call swamp hay, and this was done by the John Davis family. Uh, and they provided swamp hay, which was good for the horses, to the Continental Army during the Revolutionary War. And they're still, to this day, farmed by his great great grandson, Larry Davis, who was a friend of mine. So these areas back in here, all hay fields, and they use the salt water from Long Island Sound to keep them irrigated and growing. So this morning we're going to talk about, yesterday we talked about the camp wives, and I thought this would be a good opportunity to talk about them. They, contrary to what a lot of people believe, the camp wives were ladies of great integrity. Some people think that they had low moral character, if you get my drift. But in fact, it was just the opposite. These ladies were the wives and girlfriends of the soldiers on both sides. It was also the British. The British had camp wives or camp followers, and they were screened. Both sides were screened. They lived by a set of rules set by each army, and they were interviewed by the commanding officer of each little regiment or brigade, a detachment, and they provided a significant service to the war effort. These ladies marched behind their husbands in the with the wagons and the sort. They they did all the sewing, all the cooking, all the mending. They made things. They were on the battlefield, which we're going to talk about shortly. We'll talk about one of the more famous events, but there was these ladies, there was probably about 4,000 or 5,000 ran through the Continental Army, and about the same number for the British Army. And they did everything. They set up the tents, they set up the camps, they stayed within their camps and provided nutrition and nourishment. They fed the horses, they tended the cattle. And so as I had stated before, when you were moving your army, you were also moving a couple extra thousand people because they were there, and they did provide a vital service to the armies on both sides. It was an interesting thing that you would have this battle, and there would be women behind the lines getting ready to go. And as we saw, you had Mary Murray, and there's a whole bunch that we'll talk about throughout the series. Isn't this beautiful out here? This is just absolutely gorgeous. This is Barn Island Wildlife Management Area. It's just down the street from my house, and a couple hundred yards down the street. Gorgeous area. But look at how flat it is and clear, and that was all a function of farming. And a lot of that farming, as I said, went to the Revolutionary War on the continental side. The British didn't pay too much attention to us. To the west of us, about maybe 4 or 5 miles, is the city of New London. And New London was attacked by none other than General Benedict Arnold. And we will talk about that battle much later, because it's much later in the war. So I'm sure you've all heard Molly Pitcher. And Molly Pitcher really wasn't one person. It was a bunch of ladies, and some people have picked out one or two, but there's no real proof to it. But these ladies were some badass bitches. They, they would pick up muskets, and they would do all kinds of things in battle. These were fighting ladies. And so my friend Joseph Plum Martin, who we talked about the other day, remember the 15-year-old Connecticut man? Well, now he's 17, and we're talking about the Battle of Monmouth, New Jersey. You got to remember, it's June in 1778. It's 100 degrees outside, and they're fighting. The two sides are fighting. So I just want to quote for you. 17-year-old Continental Army Private Joseph Plum Martin wrote of what he saw that day through his saucy description that was included in his diary, but wasn't printed until 50 years later. So as I said, this diary has been very important. And he quote, "A woman whose husband belonged to the artillery and who was then attached to a piece in the engagement attended with her husband at the piece for the whole time." So here's this woman right next to her husband, working away, while in the act of reaching a cartridge and having one of her feet as far before the other as she could step, a cannon shot from the enemy passed directly between her legs without doing any damage, then carrying away the lower part of her petticoat. Looking at it with apparent unconcern, she observed that it was lucky it did not pass a little higher, for in that case it might have carried away something else. So there's, as I said, he had kind of like a little comic sense to him in his writing. But the story of Molly Pitcher, and of many ladies, but generally we'll just call her Molly Pitcher, her husband was shot while she was tending to him, and she took over his position at the artillery and stayed there for the entire battle. 100 degrees, dressed out, mad because her husband's now been shot dead, and she stayed there and fired that cannon. And there was several ladies like that. In fact, George Washington came the next day, according to his son, and paid tribute to this lady. And we're not sure who exactly it was, because there was a couple of them at that particular battle that stood out. So as you can see, the women paid a dear price. A lot of them died, and they were very impactful on the Revolutionary War. So I hope you enjoyed this on the ladies. We're going to continue our walk, so enjoy your day.